Just a little bit about Justin. Justin was a D1 scholarship athlete, professional triathlete, and Cat 3 cyclist. And over the past decade, Justin has worked with athletes in running, ultra running, cycling, triathlon, track and field, cross country, bobsled, skeleton, and luge. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered it.
Oh, well, just those then. So
Just those couple.
thanks for being here, Justin.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So overall, I find this to be a really interesting time of year for so many athletes. We kind of have the major spring endurance events that have been they kind of get a lot of the glory, if you will, the big halves, the big fulls, the first round of world major marathons are all kind of winding down. And we're also, still maybe a month or 2 months away from really getting into like the bulk of the summer 5K, 5 mile, kind of race season.
Mhm.
So I feel like it's an interesting time of year where it's kind of like multiple directions to pivot. And so I want to discuss kind of two scenarios over the course of our conversation.
Mhm.
The first being athletes that come into this time of year and their focus is on short distance racing, and how they can like kind of build that season in that calendar. And there's a second scenario of kind of athletes that are more of our endurance, our long distance endurance athletes, the kind of, we were just talking offline, the spring marathon, fall marathon type of athlete, and what they can do right now to kind of set themselves up for success in the fall.
Mhm.
So, kind of, I'll kick started off here. So, Justin, any recommendations for kind of planning out a race season for 5Ks and 5 milers throughout the summer? And we're going to start with this kind of, focus primarily on just kind of the general runner, especially kind of maybe a short distance specialist that this is their kind of race. Really, like how many races would you put on the calendar? How often do you like athletes to race? I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think this this certainly is a topic that with all my clients that I'm talking about, running, triathlon, cycling as well. It's where I get to it is about having range in events, right? I think is really key in athletic development. I think COVID, we got a lot of people into the sport new, which is awesome, and highly motivated people. Maybe might we just say type A, like to go go go, and it's like, well, what's the hardest thing? What's the best thing? What's the biggest thing? Right? We're going to the extremes, so we go into the marathon really quickly, and which is fine, but I think development is key across all disciplines. So for someone focusing on shorter distance races, for me, it takes a couple 5Ks. I firmly believe it takes a couple of shorter distance races to get into the rhythm, flow, understand how to run them. Every course is a little bit different. So this is where we find some challenges and like, oh, I didn't PR. Well, that course had 600 feet of vert in
Right.
3 miles and the other course had 50, right? So we have to be mindful of courses, terrain, footing. Is it a trail race? Is it a dirt path? Is it a paved road? Is it pothole road? What's the surface, right? And then what's the wind? What's the weather, right? Wind, humidity. Certainly north of the Mason-Dixon line. We are. I mean, we just woke up to a little bit of snow on the ground. It's not quite spring yet, but in Texas and down south, right, like they're hitting humidity and not adapted to it yet. So your first real races, you're not going to be really adapted to it on many levels, right? So with that said, I firmly believe in racing. If we're looking at 5Ks or 5 miles or 10Ks, I think you need a couple. The shorter the distance, the more you need to get into the rhythm. So 5Ks. I try to get my clients who are focusing on that event to get in like 3. And sometimes, like I have an athlete racing Carlsbad. She came off the marathon and is more of a 5K runner, shorter distances suit her. And she's like, I really want to see what I can do. So, I'm like, we have to get some races in so you can feel that intensity. Think about taking an FTP test or a 20-minute test or any kind of VO2 max hard stuff, right? The first time you do it, it often is a failure. Your brain is like, what are we doing here? Like, come on, John, what, like, no, right? So we have to work through that, and it takes a few races. 10Ks to me, it's like, 5Ks, it's like 3 to 5. And by your fifth one, spread out is good. 10Ks to me, it's like two or three. You can kind of get into the rhythm. Halves, one or two, fulls. We start looking at multiple years, right?
Yeah.
To spread things out. So,
Well, it's interesting. Just I think so many people. It's actually a cool conversation to have, you and I, because I came into this in the way that so many athletes came into running, which is like I was not a high school runner. I was not certainly not a college runner. I came in as an adult. So the mile, the 5K, those are races that still are awfully challenging to me.
mhm,
And so, and then in that marathon, half marathon scene, we'll loop back to that in a minute, but it's not uncommon. It's actually incredibly common. Like you're only racing 2 to 4 times a year, maybe. Like a lot of people, which is not that much to like really learn how to race. To your point, so when I was in the sport for a little bit, and then I kind of backtracked into the 5K, 10Ks, it was really interesting to be like, maybe I'm now racing 3 times a month. And these are workouts. And over the course of a summer, I'm racing 6, 7, 8 times. It's not that hard to do most places. And yeah, it's kind of what I feel too. It's like it takes a while to get into it and learn it. I remember the first time I ran a mile post high school, I was like in my mid 30s, and I didn't start like really speeding up till the final quarter mile.
yeah,
I
yeah.
like finished
Beer
the race.
miles don't count though. Beer miles don't count as well.
Well,
Yeah. No, but
so, but
to that point, you're talking about race exposure, right? So if you're running two marathons, say you race 3 times a year, they're all A races, right? You have three A races, so you're kind of peaking, dropping, maybe a bigger peak, and then a big drop, and then a rebuild to a fall race, right? You race 3 times, you go through that experience 3 times. You're nervous. I mean, you're always going to be nervous, but you don't really have this. You're missing out on the development of working through like what is a little taper, as Matt called it, taper tantrums, right? Like everyone goes all over the place, and don't expect to feel great going in. It doesn't mean anything as long as you race well, right? So going through putting a bib on, having people around you. What the hell does your watch do when thousands of people are running? It's blipping all over the place, right? Like all these little things if we're in bigger races. But I would also say is we get stuck in this idea that we have to do big races. That's the only meaningful thing because we see Boston, New York, Chicago, New York City half, right? On the East Coast or whatever.
yeah.
There's tons of races, and there's a way more logistics involved. There's way more hype involved. There's way more pressure involved. And so this year, as I debriefed with my clients last year, I said, we got to race more. Like I'm seeing a lot of people really nervous. The nerves never go away. It's just how we learn how to deal with them, right? So we're not going to race 6 marathons, right? We're not going to race 8 half marathons. So it's like, let's go run 5Ks. And let's go run 10Ks. So we develop a range of events, but we also have exposure, right, to them and learn how to work through them. What's your pre-race breakfast? Work through that. How do you warm up? Do you need a warm up? For the short races, yeah, 5Ks, I have people warm up for like 45 minutes because you got to be ready to go. There's no waste of time, right? Marathon, nah, first 6 miles. That's a warm up. Right? So there's a lot of nuances and changes, but exposure is the good one, right? So,
Yeah. So let's
uh,
say, I think we probably sum up that the way I phrase it with my athletes a lot, I'm like, I want you to race early and often. I think there's just
yeah,
so much benefit to the experience of racing anything from the mile onward, even for the marathoners out there in the world. So over the course of a summer, like I said, sometimes, especially in a race calendar like this, 5, 6, 7 races, not out of,
yeah,
not too much really. But that being said, not. Well, let me rephrase this as a question. That would be a better use of our time here. So we'll say you've got your calendar. You've loaded it with 5Ks, 5 milers, 10K. Your summer's built out. How do you approach kind of those races like as a group? Are you kind of having people go all out in every race? Are you using some as workouts, some as time trials?
yeah,
Um, I'll leave it there.
yeah, yeah. Well, this is the frustrating part when you start asking people with some knowledge questions. The answer is always, well, it depends, right? And That drives me crazy. So let's walk through some scenarios, right? So like in New Paltz, like which is near me, they have a summer series like every Monday
Mhm.
night. It's like 4 or 5 races, different terrain, different courses, different distances, right? So um, New York City, I mean, any major city is going to have series of events or multiple events you can get into. So
Yep.
when we're planning a calendar, what we look at is okay, what is the high priority, right? So and I think we're going to get to this a little bit later, so we can look at a short course athlete versus a long distance athlete. And I would argue people shouldn't bucket themselves, right? We should all do
Yep.
all of them, right? Because the development's important. If you really look at like in the Olympics and stuff, like the athletes just don't go to the marathon, right? They start at the 800 or mile, then they work on that speed until they're phasing out, not doing as productive. Then they shift up to the 5K, 10K, half, full, and it's a progress, right? So it should be a progress, best case scenario. But when we look at a calendar, what are the key things? So I rank A, B, and C level, right, for events. So like if we give a scenario like, like someone doing Boston, right now. So if we're looking early season, it's like, hey, like there might not be a lot of opportunities. Maybe a New Year's Eve thing, certainly in the north it's cold and whatever. We might have to do a treadmill, time trial or something like that, which is not my favorite because again, I want exposure to doing all these things. But we have to pocket them, right? The closer we're getting to an A race, the less, almost like the lower priority it goes for me because we need to kind of adapt. Like we need to have some bandwidth for some error, right? We don't want to get hurt.
Mhm.
Uh, we need to recover off of it depending on the distance, right? Like, so 5Ks for me are like a couple days, like we kind of get back into it the next day, but like
Yeah.
slow and ease into an intensity is kind of like 3, 4 days away from it. For a 10K, it's, like it's going to be easy, a couple days, maybe off day. And, this is all for joint health. Like we feel muscle soreness and stuff, but we don't perceive joint and tendon health. So
Mhm.
plantar fasciitis, iliotibial band syndrome, ITB, hip flexor stuff, like knee stuff. Like we get all that because we rush too quickly back into things. So we're building out that calendar of like where my A, B, and C events, right? And so to me, the answer is like what kind of effort. It just depends. The closer we get, the more it's a workout or
Mhm.
a progressive effort or working on some quality that we are missing out on, right? So, for instance, I have people running, 2 clients running in London who did New York City half, and they were already signed up for New York City half, and then they got into London. So, New York City
Mhm.
half was A, and then it London became A, and I'm like, well, we can't have two A's because this 13-mile race is right around where we run our 20-miler, my
Yeah.
20-miler, so 4 or 5 weeks out. So I'm like, we just have to kind of move things around, and so we worked on a quality of like being progressive, dealing with people early on, not getting caught up in the race, and so on and so forth. And they raced, um, Adam and Carly raced great, and it was awesome to see. Right. Um, if we're further out, then it could be all out. You know,
Mhm.
just like and very little guidance. Like, hey, go run as hard as you can, see what happens. And I know people are paying for coaching and whatever, but for me, it's like I get to see what their did they go out too fast? Did they go out too slow because they weren't confident? Did they, whatever? They attacked the hill when they should have rested, and then we go from there, and then we facilitate success moving forward. So, uh, a short answer is, it depends.
Mhm.
Closer you get to your A race, it should be working on some skill set. The further away, the more we can kind of rip into it for a long distance athlete, and then for a short course athlete, someone who's focusing on 5Ks, every time we're running hard. Like you need that exposure. You need to find that fine line of like, I'm going out at 6:45 pace, and then my thing is about being progressive. Well, in the marathon, we're going to drop like 10, 15 seconds a mile, like as we go throughout the race, right? Whereas a 5K, it's like, it might be 5 second differential between your slowest and fastest mile,
Yeah.
right? So it's not super progressive, and that takes a little bit to get used to. So,
Yeah. I'd be curious. One of the cooler ways that I've kind of heard this described, and this will be common knowledge to you because you lived this life, but it was very interesting to me, which is college athletes, which I got to coach one college athlete through its coaching season. You've coached many, many, many college athletes. Um, they start the year and basically at a race season. right?
Mhm.
Like you show up off of summer training, you're like hoping these kids stayed fit over the summer, and they
Hopefully.
start racing immediately.
Yeah.
And when you're going to cross country, then you go to indoor, and then you go to outdoor. And it's interesting talking. You worked in college coaching. Our coach, Aaron, Team Wilpers coach Aaron Denon, works still in college coaching,
Yeah.
and I just am a fan of the sport. So these kids show up. They're like certainly not at peak fitness, but they can't be at peak fitness for race one, like week
Yeah.
3 of the school year, and then also be in peak fitness in the winter and be in fitness in the spring. So, what these college kids are doing, and I think we can all just take kind of a lesson,
Yeah.
is you're training and racing. You're training and racing, and then what you want to be peaking is in the big end of year meets, the regionals,
Yeah.
the states, nationals, etc. That's when you want to be at really your peak.
Yeah.
So what I think we can take away from it is how they use racing and racing often. I mean, we're talking. Granted, these kids are 20 years old, but they're racing every single week.
Yeah.
In addition to training load for kind of some of these short middle distance races
Yeah.
to get ready for their peak race at the end of the year. So
Yeah. And then we're using races to develop quality. Like the good coaches are using races, so you know, you know, some coaches are just like race hard, 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 and the training load's high, so like really the intensity they can't hit that intensity.
okay.
So but it's over time. Some coaches like have athletes skip to go later, like at the very elite level, like they just delay them, right? Because in a year, it's really hard to have three peaks, like in a calendar year or academic calendar year. It's very hard, and so you need space and you need downtime and different stuff like this. But I look at it as like, John, if you're okay, so if you're a little bit better, like say you're well, let me ask you, what do you out of 5K to marathon, including 10K and half, where do you feel like you are your best?
Yeah, the half marathon. Well, other than ultra,
Yeah.
the slow and steady. The half marathon has been my best like grade adjusted time.
Okay. So if I'm working with you and like all our clients, because I do want to be, I know what you're saying is like, let's race often. I know the people on this call, I see them and they're often doing a little bit too much intensity or like trying to rip into it. So I want to be mindful and I'm not trying to discredit what you're saying. But if your thing is the half, it's like, okay, I want to race like, hey, let's like try a marathon, like let's go to the marathon and longer to make your endurance better for the half. You can endure
Mhm.
more. And then we'll use 5Ks and 10Ks to go faster. Because what ends up happening is if you're trying to run 2 hours and your PR for the 10K is an hour, you can't run your PR
Tough.
twice, right? So if we can focus on a little bit of the 10K stuff while not losing the longer stuff, then we go and run 50 minutes. Well, you can go run 57 minutes twice, which is 7 minutes off your PR, which is
Mhm.
very manageable. And then you can go, what's that, 156, right? So you can be under
Mhm.
two, and vice versa. To run 50, if your PR in the 5K is 25 minutes, you can't PR twice in the 5K, right? So we
Yep.
have to get that 5K down. So to me, how I used races, especially when I coach college, and I coach sprinters and distance runners, but for the last decade, I coached sprinters, jumpers, hurdlers, and stuff. And it's like, okay, early season, it's cold and wet, so it's like we're not racing the 100 to start off with. Everyone's gonna run longer. So my 100-meter runners would run 400 or 200 in a special way, and then 4x4. My 400 runners would run at 600 or 800, and we do specific things in there to help the qualities down the road. Then
Yep.
by like the second week, it would be, we could go shorter, faster, so that we basically Goldilocks their event in a sense. And then by the third week, it's like, okay, we've done stuff where we've gone out slower and kicked. We've done things where we went out fast and hung on. And now we put all those pieces together. And then we look through the season like, hey, I really think, you need X, Y, or Z. So that's what we do in one-on-one coaching is trying to figure out like what capacities do we need to develop. And I think races, training along with races are a great opportunity for that. So, uh, the last thing I'll say on that point is just be careful of like getting away from what your strengths are. I feel like we're always like, we get to a certain point, like, hey, I need to work on my weaknesses. And, your strengths are here and your weaknesses here. And then what we end up doing is working on all our weaknesses. It moves to here. And then we miss time on our strength and it moves down, it moves way down. And so now we just don't feel great. in anything. So I try to keep strengths, and it's like over time we're just trying to notch those areas for growth, whether it's pacing, whether it's the short stuff, whether it's the long stuff. We just like over time trying to notch those up. So that's kind of the fun puzzle
Yeah.
with all this.
Which is kind of a perfect transition, actually. So let's I'll start to rephrase this because you hit you called me on something well, which is like let's not fully put people in buckets of like the long distance versus
Yeah,
the short
but it's
distance.
okay. Yeah, yeah,
But for yeah, purpose of conversation. Um, so no secret here. The longer races are currently getting all. So we see a lot of athletes that are spring marathon, fall marathon, spring
yeah,
marathon, fall marathon.
yeah,
And you mentioned hard to peak three times in a collegiate year. When I was working with US track and field, I mean, they sort of believed in the marathon, really you had one peak per
yeah.
year is really what you could get if you wanted to go through a real complete training cycle.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to just put a scenario out there. It's going to resonate to some people. You're going to recognize it immediately, and it's going to be all too familiar to even me, which is you get in this marathon cycle, and even half marathon
Mhm.
cycle. Time gets a little bit better, time gets a little bit better, time gets a little bit better, and then you're in the spring fall cycle, and you never get any faster anymore. You're
Mhm.
just running, and I've seen it in a zillion, athlete after athlete. You get to a point, it's like 3:14, 3:13, 3:15, 3:13:47, and
Yeah,
you're like years go by without any progress here.
right.
So this is my long setup to say for our kind of we'll say marathon, half marathon specialists out there. I mentioned this is kind of a shoulder season. So let me put this into a question, which is some of this 5K, 10K style racing and training. Is there a time and place to bring it into the marathon cycle or the half marathon cycle and use this as an opportunity to kind of work differently?
Yeah, yeah. So I think this is a really key point, and this is I think it has a lot to do, like social media and FOMO. Like and we want to encourage people like doing big events and getting to finish start lines and getting to the finish line, right? It's an amazing event. Marathons, it's a small percentage of people that get to do them. Half marathons are a little bit more feasible for people with families and work and different stuff, because marathons you can't fake it, right? Like you can't. A half, I'm not saying you can fake it, but you can get away with some missed stuff or some lower volume. But the marathon, you can't, right? So it's a huge commitment. Um, so, you know, I'll just I'll do a hot take here. I don't like two marathons a year. I really don't. Especially as we get old. If it works out that way, like you played lottery and you got into like
Mhm.
you qualify for Boston, or you got into London, you're going after the world majors and stuff like that. Like we'll do it. We'll do it, right? But for me, it's like in between. So like, Boston and London, they're going April. So we've been going since December, beginning of December, right? 16, 20 weeks, right? So it's just a big crescendo up. And
Mhm.
then fall stuff, Chicago, Berlin, New York, Philly, it all starts June, depending on, when the race is, right? So April to June, you have May, right? And people are like, oh, I don't want to back off. Like we have to have time to shut things down, like literally shut down, like a week off, go on a vacation, get away from training. And people are like, no, I don't like off days. I feel guilty. I feel shame. I don't, right. And it's like, you need to back off, because your training year, if I like, based on like load and stuff, like your chronic load. So on Training Peaks, your TSS score, the density of
Yeah.
your training, right. But just like we kind of want to go up, right. And then we need to bring it down, right. You absolutely need to detrain and bring it down, so that then we can go back and then maybe have a higher peak, or at least close enough, right? So yeah, I don't love two marathons. I do it, but I usually try to encourage people, like if we do it one year, then like immediately like, okay, yes, but next year it should be one. It really should be one, because what you see is not just a plateau of time, you also see an increase of injury. And I'm not trying to scare people, but you also get an increase of like, or decrease of motivation. You're just getting beat down on it over time, and all, so it's not really well planned out, right? Um, so for me, how I incorporate, that is like I had this scenario, like, woman, a bunch of people in Chicago, and I was like, okay, like a marathon's not next. Like what? I'm like, yeah, no, you might have to find a different coach because it's not. I'm joking, but they're like, let's focus on something else, a half, a 5K, a 10K, and we'll build up to it. Now the training doesn't change that much, and that's hard for people to see. So like my 5Kers, if we're marathoners and half marathons, when we go to the 5K, I'm not cutting a ton of volume. The
Yeah.
intensity goes up, so volume comes down. But because I want to support them up here through their training, right? And there's some space, right? Some bandwidth. And then when we go, okay, we pull the trigger. Okay, we went through the spring, we focus on the 5K or 10K or half. Then we shut it down a little bit, and then we got the fall. It's not like we're down here trying to raise from 20 miles a week to 40, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, we were holding high 30s to high 40s, and we're in this bandwidth, and now we're like just honestly sometimes not even changing stuff. It's just like the long run. So what the focal point is. So I might be going off a topic. Did I get close to?
Yeah, no, you're good.
Yeah,
Let me throw something in there, and I'll just be
yeah,
curious to hear. So I have all sorts of opinions on this, but I'll try to keep them a little bit. But I heard something yesterday that actually like really resonated with me because I'm a huge proponent in taking people, especially the marathoners, off of the marathon, giving them. I asked for the 2 weeks post marathon to like shut it down for
yeah,
most people, actually for the tendon health that you talked about earlier, and then I get them back into 200-meter repeats, 400-meter repeat, really short distance, high intensity stuff.
mhm,
And I just know on an energy zone perspective why I like it. But what I heard yesterday was really, spoke to me, which is this guy. He was basically he's a pro runner, a pro trail runner. But he's like the marathon in particular. These athletes, even at the pro level, this is a really efficient stride, like
yeah,
a really economical stride. You're not popping off the ground. Your feet are barely lifting up. I mean, your toes are hovering over, as opposed to a sprinter who has this huge dynamic movement, knees driving, hamstrings, extending back in a straight line. You're generating a ton of power and force production. That's not happening when you're doing, even half marathon, full marathon, these 20-mile runs. All you're trying to do is save as much energy as humanly possible and be
yeah,
most economical.
right,
So they're like, in terms of athleticism, like you're actually losing some athleticism to go to these super long distances.
yeah,
And that I have felt personally. I didn't quantify it until I heard someone else kind of describe it like that. But it's like, yeah, when I get a chance to finish my big endurance seasons and I can go into either an off season or where kind of for me, where I feel like I am right now, it's like, some of these things are wrapping up here into April. I'm jazzed to get on the track and do hard 200-meter repeats. It's
yeah,
like where I feel my like athleticism and strength sort of come alive, and you get some of those, the elasticity and the, all that benefit from higher intensity exercise. So
yeah.
not so much of a question there, unfortunately, but
No, but
it's
but you're talking about like, is it F1 car? You're a F1 fan. Is the F1 car a 24-hour car? No,
no.
right? So there's different demands, and like, to me, it's like when we're going longer, like the training, the race demands, all those like push us to be more like a Prius. Like we need to be really efficient, right? Um, and but my thing is like people are like, I'm a Prius. I'm like, you are what you repeatedly do. So if we just continue, like I don't like 5Ks. They hurt. I'm not good at them, and whatever. And it's like, well, we have 7 zones. There's plenty of zones. We can make up whatever zones. We can do 3 zones, 4 zones,
Yes.
whatever. But there's basically intensity levels that we know, right? And
Yep.
to me, it's like the analogy is like, like the slower stuff is the base building, the foundation, right? But a lot of people just build a foundation and then they stop there, right? Like they might get in the thresholds 3 and 4, and then I'm talking about real, like, people are running 2, 3 marathons a year, right?
Yep.
They never put the roof on, which is zone 7 in the high intensity neuromuscular, coordination, force development, tendon health, right?
Mm.
Like tendon health of like sprinting, you need load in the tendons to recover them. So if you ever had Achilles tendonitis or anything like that, or patella tendonitis, or like you can't, it doesn't heal by taking time off. You literally need to load the tendon to send the things there to repair and reorganize to get in in plane, right? So for me, it's like I'm always like trying to develop both qualities at once. It's called parallel periodization. So as we're periodizing training, like planning where we're going, to me, it's like we're always doing all qualities at all zones all the time within 2 or 3 weeks. It's just like if we're going marathon, I have 3 key days. It's like key workouts. You got VO2 max on Monday, Thursdays are threshold, and Saturdays are long runs. Okay, so if we're racing 5K, that's a F1 car. So the priority is not the long run. The priority is the VO2 max work, the closer to that work, right? So we're trying to fine tune it, we're just trying to do a couple hot laps and be efficient, right? If we're doing the marathon, the VO2 max is supportive, it's necessary, but it's not the key session. The key session is the long run, right? And then for the half, it's really the threshold. Your threshold pace is not too far off of what your half Ironman or half marathon pace is, right? So my thing is like, if you take a Ferrari engine and put it in a like, if we're too powerful, and this is sometimes what you see like swimmers like transitioning into triathlon.
Yeah.
Huge engine, but their frame, the body, is not ready for the pounding and the force, right? New runners, big engines, crew, like do other sports, right? They have that mentality, but their bodies, bones, and tendons and joints aren't used to all that pounding, right? Same thing, like the Prius, like, you know, we you're only going to go be efficient and go 40 miles to the gallon, right? You're not going to get faster. And again, it gets back to that, like if you PR in shorter distances, it makes it going out for that distance easier, right? So,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm constantly about development of the range of athletes, and your speed stuff, like the fast stuff, you know, I mean, even the same with the analogy F1, like it just doesn't happen overnight, right? There's
Sure.
hundreds of people developing products and whatever. So your speed takes months and months and months, if not years, to develop. And so doing one hit workout or a couple hit workouts a week, or lifting a couple, for a month, or it's like it's moving the needle, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's just like flickering it. So anyway,
Yeah.
I could go on about that.
Well, I think what ultimately is so important to this, and again, I mentioned the plateaus and endurance performance, and
Yeah.
so uh, there's a Olympic testing center out in like Colorado, I think,
Yeah.
or one of those
Oh,
big like, yeah, Colorado Springs, and they obviously test a lot of athletes, very different sports, but it's also in a huge trail running and ultra running
yeah.
community. So a lot of those ultra runners are going in there, and so let's just throw them in a bucket of our big like long distance endurance athletes, and what
Yeah.
they're seeing and testing over and over and over and over again is we've got three thresholds, right? You got aerobic, lactic, and then basically your anaerobic capacity threshold there
Hmm.
is that their kind of anaerobic capacity threshold is just ever so slightly above that lactic threshold. So
Hmm.
basically, it's like your zone 6 and your zone 4 are right there together. And so, in essence, it means you're stuck. Like you can keep training aerobically, you can keep training threshold, but your lactic threshold is never going above your anaerobic capacity. It's not happening. It's not going above your VO2 max. So you mentioned kind of use the roof until you raise the top end. There's no more room. You're out of room. All you're going to do is like maybe get marginally more efficient doing the same thing. So if you love to repeat the process, do the same training, get the same result. By all means, do so.
Yeah.
I think most people tend to get frustrated with that, and so then I'll actually reframe this into a question because Justin, I think you'll be able to like very astutely speak to this. And so, you know, let's just think about like if we're building our ideal athlete, our ideal schedule. We have someone come in and they say, "You will do whatever you say." I'm a blank canvas, and we're looking at a training year trying to get the most out of that athlete. And well, for the sake of this, we'll say there's one major endurance event in the fall, and then the rest of the year is kind of a blank canvas.
Mhm.
How would you structure, let's say, a 52-week calendar to like build an athlete up to like the peak runner, if you will?
Yeah. Yeah. Say we're doing a big event, and yeah, let's just say a marathon, right? Or in marathon, whatever it is for you, right?
Hmm.
Whatever your marathon is, it might be a half, it might be a 10K.
Yep.
For some people, it might be a 5K. Whatever it is, don't be discouraged by hearing marathons, and I'm not there yet. It's just it all trickles down into the same stuff. So
Yeah.
wherever the peak is, I always go back. You want to kind of reverse engineer and go backwards. So like, I actually had this with like one of my first clients. She wanted to run a marathon, but she's never raced anything before, and new to running and whatever. So it's like, let's go run a 5K. And so if I, yeah, well, let me start with this. What I first do with anyone is what is the peak event and go backwards, right? So
Yeah.
marathon or anything, it's at least 16 weeks. Like for me, it's like somewhere between 12 and 20 weeks, right? The less experienced they are, the longer I want to be in a very structured kind of template plan that I know how people react to, and
Yep.
that will guide them along. And I always make, fine tune it to each person. So that just pull 20 weeks off, I think, safely. And then from there, you want to start that feeling fresh. So that should be kind of like a lower training period. So you're going into it fresh and building through the program. What's the number one thing that people do? I signed up. Let's go. 20 weeks. Kick my butt, coach. Here we go. Let's go. I'm ready to do it. Bam, slam everything hard, 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 hard. And then they just, as we're getting to the bigger stuff, they just fizzle out, right? So you
Uh,
want to crescendo into the event. So 20 weeks out, then I would say like 2, 3, maybe 2 weeks that are a little bit easy. So we're fresh, catch up on things, because that 20 weeks is going to be really commitment. Shouldn't be going out late, dealing with kids, family, illness, like a million things, right? And then from there, it's like, okay, like, can I build in a few week buffer, maybe another 3 weeks, and then we should have some kind of event somewhere in there, like something to kind of the previous 20 something weeks that we can kind of keep building up to that, shut it down, recover, and then build up slowly to the 20 miler. So I like putting like anywhere from a 5K to a half, coming out 20 weeks, like another somewhere 6 weeks prior to that, so that we can have this like focus thing. Because a lot of people lose focus, without an event to like kind of, to go 52 weeks
yeah.
towards one event is challenging. But to go back to the little scenario I was saying is like a clean slate. It's like first let's race a 5K,
Mhm.
and then let's throw in maybe a half or 10, and like going, and I'll see what people. So this athlete, like with VDOT charts, we can, as coaches, we can see like, hey, like if you run X time in a 5K, the equivalent for the longer distance is X, Y, and Z, right? And people are like, what? I can run that? It's like, well, no, you need the training to support that, but that is kind of what your capacity is. And she raced a 5K, like 25 minutes, and it said like she could run 153 or 154 for the half. She ran 154, like another 10, 12 weeks later. And then it said she could run, 353. And she was on pace for it, except like, she didn't believe that you can negative split. So she tried to bank time early. She ate it a little bit and ran like four, like low four. So not too far off. But then her
Yeah.
next marathon, she was like 351. So like, we can also see that like things line up, and that's why again we go back to our original thing of development. Like if my 5K VO2 max score is here, and my half is up here, maybe like you, and then your full is like somewhere down here, like to me it's like, all right, like here are your strengths, and the 5K is your weakness. So let's continue the strengths here, but let's see if we can notch that up, because that's going to go up, and actually it'll start pushing the other ones up, right? So we can kind of develop a profile
Yep.
of the client, to see like, where the strengths or weaknesses are, and it's not something like boom, like we have that set in stone like day one. It's like, like we got to kind of figure this out. So it's more of a long term development thing, which I think is important.
Yeah.
So
You know, just kind of one thing to tack on, and then we'll wind this down here pretty soon. Here, one thing I think, maybe a message, my message at least, that I'd love people to take away is when people come in and ask, what we hear all the time is, how long does it take to get ready for this event? Great answer, always it depends. But my answer in that scenario is always like, how long do you have? Like, because
yeah,
like I want to start today to get ready for something 2 years from now. Like, there's no reason that we wouldn't make that trajectory if we've got the timeline and the ambition,
yeah,
and and yeah, reverse engineer from there. But really, for whether the 5K marathon, what doesn't matter what the peak event is, but really I'm sitting back usually looking and saying like, I want better part of a year to go after it. And the reason that I say I want a year, which like everyone would think I'm crazy, is when we break down the time it takes to maximize energy zone adaptation.
Mhm.
You look at aerobic is actually the longest. It takes about like 20 weeks of aerobic training to maximize out that energy zone. And then if you go 25 weeks, you're starting to like lose the benefit of it. So you've got to change your training stimulus. And so you jump into, let's say, VO2 max work, and it takes 12 weeks to maximize the benefit of VO2 max training. Then it takes another 12 weeks to maximize the result of lactic threshold training. So you start adding that up there, you're already at 44 weeks just to try to get to, your body to a spot where really at that point you sort of like flip back, reframe, and kind of start the next level of training again. Um, and without all the different parts and pieces, the spending the time at VO2 max, spending the time doing the focus threshold stuff, spending the power generating activity, you're just leaving kind of meat on the bone, if you will, of trying to like make the better athlete to go out and kind of have a better jumping off point. So,
Yeah.
I think in trying to figure out a good way to button us up here
There, I got
is
it. So I think what you're talking on is one of these things that like I tell people like quick to ripen, quick to spoil. I heard that one time, right? So if we have a short timeline, like to me, it's like how much do you want? Like the shorter the time, the more visceral it's going to be, and the
yeah,
less enjoyable it's going to be. But we can produce results, in shorter amount of time. It's just like a ton of intensity. Hold on the gas, and then wait to the last second to back off. Boom, we get the recovery unload, and then pop, we hit it right. But if what you're talking about a little bit more, and what we like to see is a little bit more like slower, gradual, like ripening, right? It's like so
mm,
it's the difference between like don't be a banana, be a potato, right? Like like bananas are like done, they're over. That's your high intensity. That's waiting to the last second, and you can get it done with the right coach, right? But if we're a potato, then as long as you stick us in a cold place, we're good for a long, long time and useful. So we're not going to rot away. So that's what we want to kind of see. Be a potato, not a banana.
perfect. I think perfect spot to end it right there. Be a potato. It's like my
Not a
phrase,
couch
always trying to
potato,
make
but a
the
potato.
kind of the bulletproof athlete. It's one that's adaptable to multiple conditions and ultimately like build the best athlete we can possible. So,
Yeah,
well, Justin, thanks so much for being here. Always love chatting. Always learn so much just listening to you talk. So I appreciate the time. Hope
yeah,
everybody took some value out of this, and we'll do it again soon.
yeah, absolutely. Don't hesitate to reach out, people, if you have
All
questions.
right. Have a
All
great
right,
one,
later.
Justin.
Bye, John.